Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Today, I'll be showing you everything you need to know to heal the Narrowbar Palace raid like a pro as a Holy Priest. I've main priest for over 10 years now at a Hall of Fame raid level, and one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite healers is the powerful holy words that you are bringing to the table, both in Serenity, which is a huge single target heal, which is excellent for saving allies who are dropping low, and Sanctify, which is the ground-based heal that is healing 5 allies within that radius. These very powerful abilities are 1-minute cooldowns, and you're able to have 2 charges of them, but you're also able to reduce their cooldowns further by casting synergistic abilities. Flash Heal, Heal, and Prayer of Mending, for example, reduce the cooldown of Serenity, since they're all single target based heals. Prayer of Healing and Circle of Healing are reducing the cooldown out of Sanctify, and from a damage perspective, if you're talented into some of the synergistic abilities, Holy Nova, Holy Fire, and Smite reduce the cooldown of your Chastise. So your gameplay is a straightforward healing playstyle that is built around these holy words and is very flexible in terms of how you are casting your abilities and how you're getting more of these holy words to blast huge healing. In a raid environment, you predominantly want to be focusing on more of the AoE spells to get more Sanctifies to blast for tons of output on AoE. This also synergizes with our Mastery, which leaves healing over time effects after you heal your allies. So not only could you blast a huge heal into an ally with your Holy Word Serenity, pushing up their health pools quickly, but a percentage of that healing also is added into a healing over time effect for them after the fact. There's 2 big talent builds that you're going to be seeing in a variety of guides. The first and foremost is going to be the Lightwell raid build. This build is going to be probably your bread and butter. It's going to be more easy to be able to operate, and it really revolves around dropping your Lightwell and consistently sort of refreshing it before the cooldown expires so that you're not overlapping any sort of stacks, since you have 20 charges of Lightwell when you drop it, but you can refresh it early. Up to 5 stacks of the old Lightwell will carry forward into the new one. So it's a very easy heal to be able to sit down, place, and give you more synergy with some of the talents like Light of the Naru to just give you more Holy Word output whenever you need it. This is a very good talent build to use with fights like lots of movement. An encounter like Smolderon, for example, in the previous raid, had a big burst of AoE damage, and then everyone had to move very quickly. And so encounters where it's more difficult to use our other talent builds, this is going to be the preferred one for you. Now, the Divine Word build is probably going to be my personal favorite and one I love playing with, where you are focusing on using this talent called Divine Word to empower your Holy Word spells. Namely, this is going to be built off of using Divine Word to empower your Sanctify. And when you do so, you're going to drop this light field onto the ground for a few seconds, which does a large amount of healing. As a result, you are going to need to have everyone take advantage of Divine Word's increased healing for Sanctify and the ground effect so that players are not moving out of it too early and causing it to lose some more value. This build also plays around Epiphany, which is an incredibly important part of your kit, which can cause your holy words to reset the cooldown of your Prayer of Mending, with some other synergistic talents like Answered Prayers, which both builds are running. More Prayer of Mendings gives you more healing, which then gives you more stacks of your Prayer of Mending, giving you Apotheosis, which is an empowered form. This is a key way to get your raid cooldown in Holy Word Salvation back much more rapidly. Before we continue, I wanted to give a huge thank you to our sponsor, Boot.dev. They teach you back-end web development from start to finish in both Go and Python's programming languages, and they believe, just like with WoW, the best way to learn is by doing, and one of the things that can always get in the way of learning is getting bored. And so that's why their platform is amazing, as it is online, self-paced, and they've built it to feel like a captivating RPG game alongside of it. While in WoW, we have our leaderboards and we have our parses, Boot.dev has XP, levels, achievements, and quests to complete to be able to track your progression throughout your learning journey and to help keep you on track. They also so heavily stand by their product that they offer a 30-day, no questions asked refund policy, and they also offer a free demo of every course and all its interactive features if you want to see if it's for you. So be sure to click the link in the description box down below and use my code AutomaticJak to get 25% off your first payment for Boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or first year, depending on the subscription you choose. Huge thank you to Boot.dev, and let's continue. Before we get too deep into our abilities, let's start talking about our hero talents. Archon is a very straightforward and easy to use hero talent where it is empowering your halo, causing it to expand and contract repeatedly, blasting for a crazy amount of healing onto your allies, and also giving you Surge of Light procs, which is one of your talents that gives you a free and instant cast flash heal that you can cast onto your allies. It also features bonus stamina for you specifically, and a bit of bonus haste out of your power infusion ability. This cooldown and hero talent is incredibly powerful for every single raid fight in the Nerebar Palace raid and will often be your default. And how you really want to leverage this properly, and we'll touch more on it in the rotation section, is you want to make sure you're using it as the damage is beginning. If you say have a 15-second period of damage happening, you want to make sure you're using your halo at the very start so that it's healing the entire time, but also every ally that is healed is also buffed by a talent called Resonant Energy, increasing their healing taken for a brief period. So you want to make sure you're using it early so that it's doing healing on its own, buffing your allies to be able to do even more healing as you follow up with more Holy Word casts. The next hero talent is Oracle, and it has 3 cycling buffs. So every time you use the first buff, it goes immediately to the second buff, and it goes 1, 2, 3 in order, and then it has a 4th buff called Clairvoyance, and Clairvoyance features all 3 of the buffs. So the first buff is cooldown reduction from Insight, and you really want to use this for Prayer of Mending casts. As I mentioned earlier in the talent section, we have a talent called Answered Prayers, which for every Prayer of Mending hit, we are gaining a stack of a buff. When we hit 50 stacks of the buff, we are empowering into the Apotheosis form. So again, getting to get your Holy Words back much more rapidly. Insight is incredibly strong for that. Your next buff is Piety, which is an overheal redirect, and it's also a flat healing increase. So you could pop this and use one of your raid cooldowns in Divine Hymn or Salvation, but you also have that overheal redirect that when you buff it with other talents called Fate Bender, it makes your overheal protection go from 70% of overhealing to 98% of overhealing. With this, you can actually use another talent in the Oracle tree called Prophet's Will, which increases the healing you do to yourself. And you can basically make yourself the seedling trinket from the Amir Jasil raid we just had last expansion, where you can Guardian Spirit yourself for more healing and smash tons of healing into yourself when this buff is up, and it'll redirect to your allies. I would also highly recommend you use it with another raid cooldown for the maximum overheal redirect. Solace is, of course, going to be our 3rd buff, giving a massive absorb for about half of somebody's life and about 20% damage reduction. And then, like I mentioned, Clairvoyance is all 3 of the buffs. And so when you activate that, you'd want to cast Prayer of Mendings, and the first Prayer of Mending target is also going to receive the Solace damage reduction and absorb. And then once you've cleared your Prayer of Mending Insight cooldown reduction, then you would want to go into Piety and start leveraging that overheal by pooling up Holy Words in advance, even casting Holy Words like Serenity into yourself to redirect to your allies to blast big healing. It's very fun to play and much more challenging to master, and so I think there might be some niche uses for this early on, but it will really shine as we get more geared and as overheal increases. For our stats, you're almost always going to be taking the highest eye level piece, as intellect is key, but following those for secondaries, you want to have crit and mastery, both very good, with a slight emphasis on crit, followed up by verse and then haste. The spec doesn't really need much of any haste to be able to operate pretty well, and you're naturally going to get some as you're gearing, but when possible, you want to avoid like necks and rings that have haste on them because it doesn't add too much for the spec. Our tier set bonus is increasing the effect of Serendipity by 10%. Now, Serendipity is our general Holy Word cooldown reduction we mentioned at the start of the video. This is the reason why casting a Flash Heal reduces Serenity's cooldown. Casting a Prayer of Healing reduces Sanctify's cooldown. It's just 10% more effective. Our 4th set bonus is causing Heal, Flash Heal, and Prayer of Healing to have a 50% chance to cast again at 35% effectiveness. So what this does is if you cast a Prayer of Mending onto your allies, you're going to get a few seconds of cooldown reduction naturally, around 6 or 7 seconds. And then if you have that chance to trigger it again, then you're having a 35% effectiveness heal onto your allies, but also the reduced effect onto the cooldown reduction. So your 7-ish seconds of cooldown reduction becomes around 10 or 11 seconds of cooldown reduction for your Holy Words. Thus, giving you a lot more of those holy words that we love to see. And when we talk about our spell priority, you're only going to ramp this up with good gameplay. So let's talk about gameplay for Holy Priest. Your big priorities are, of course, to make sure you're keeping your Prayer of Mending on cooldown throughout the raid encounter at all times. You often want to make sure you're casting it on the tank just to make sure that it's going to be bouncing, but after that, it's on its own and it will find targets to heal. You want to make sure you're using your holy words in Serenity and in Sanctify. You ideally want to make sure you're never overcapping on those and making sure you're finding good piles of players specifically to use it on Sanctify, usually using it like right into the boss as raid damage is going out. You also want to make sure you're keeping your Circle of Healing on cooldown. Circle of Healing not only does efficient healing and it's very cheap to cast, but it also grants you the Prayer Circle buff, where after you cast Circle of Healing, it reduces the cost and cast time of your Prayer of Healing. This is around the only time that you really want to take advantage of Prayer of Healing is when you have the Prayer Circle buff, because otherwise it gets very expensive to be able to utilize properly. Now, whenever you're using Archon, you pretty much want to make sure you're using Halo as damage is about to begin or as damage is happening onto the raid, because the healing it does is incredibly high, and you want to make sure you're buffing all your allies with that increased healing taken out of that Resonant Energy talent we talked about earlier. If you were playing an Oracle playstyle, you pretty much are going to be sending your Insight and your Solace very freely when it comes to your cooldown usage. Those are your cooldown reduction and your damage reduction. Whenever you have Insight, just tossing out all of the Prayer of Mendings that you possibly can. When it comes to using the Piety Overheal Redirect, this is when you're going to try to aim it to use with some of your raid cooldowns. This is when you want to use it with the Divine Hymn or with the Salvation. As we mentioned before, if you're spec'd into Fatebender, you have the Overheal protection, as you can Guardian Spirit yourself and dump Serenities into yourself even at full health, and the Overheal gets redirected to all of your allies. When we're talking about using Divine Word, if you're talented into it, keep in mind that it buffs your Holy Word Sanctify, and it places a field after you've cast Sanctify. So not only do you want to make sure that it's going to do healing in that instant moment when it's empowered, but you also want to make sure the field that you're placing down is going to receive value from players standing in that field. A major talent in the Divine Word build is Epiphany, and with Epiphany, you want to make sure that whenever you have Prayer of Mending coming off cooldown, that you be looking to cast a holy word soon afterwards. This could be Salvation, this could be Chastise, Serenity, Sanctify, any of your holy words. That usually what I'm trying to do is, if I have holy words coming off cooldown and I don't need to spend them immediately, that's when I'm going to look to try and game for some of these Epiphany resets. Cast the Prayer of Mending, instantly try to cast a holy word to see if I can reset the cooldown. That being said, if somebody's in dire danger, just make sure you're using those holy words. Just make sure that you're going to be healing them. And the last major thing to focus on when in a raiding environment is answered prayers. Now, answered prayers, you want to make sure you have a weak aura to track this at all times, as the stacks are insanely important to keep an eye on. When you reach 50 stacks, that's when you are going to activate Apotheosis. And so all of your holy word synergistic spells, your flash heals, your prayer of healings, and so on are going to be more effective at bringing your holy words back. Now you want to make sure you track this and other cooldowns to maximize the amount of holy words that you're getting back off cooldown. So if you're at 47 or 48 stacks and you know that you're about to proc Apotheosis on the next damage hit from the boss, you want to make sure as that hit is about to happen that while still following our priority, not overcapping holy words, keeping Prayer of Mending on cooldown, you might hold on to something like Circle of Healing, use it just before you proc Apotheosis, and then you're casting Prayer of Healings during your Apotheosis uptime to bring back Sanctifies. So when you have the Apotheosis proc that's limited, you want to make sure you're casting holy word reducing abilities first, namely Prayer of Healing, or using holy word spells that are going to be free during that period. It's more value to get more holy words than it is to get the mana cost reduction, but if you don't have those spells to be able to cast, or you're overcapped on holy words, make sure you're spending them. You do not want to be using spells like Halo or Holy Nova during that Apotheosis duration, if possible, since you can miss out on quite a few additional holy words every time the proc is going around. Now, when it comes to your cooldowns, you have some excellent ones, with Halo producing massive healing on a 1-minute cooldown and making your allies take more healing, while Divine Hymn, you need to make sure you're having space to stand still for 5 seconds as you channel the ability. And with Salvation, while it's a very long cooldown, it's reduced by having more Holy Word casts, and so you'd ideally try to prioritize this early in a raid encounter. You also want to make sure that you are prepared for the eventual answered prayers proc to give you the apotheosis, since Salvation is putting 2 stacks of Prayer of Mending and Renew onto the entire raid, as well as a solid heal onto them. And so with this, when you cast Salvation, you're not only putting out a huge heal, but you also are going to have a lot of follow-up in terms of casting Prayer of Healings to give you lots of cooldown reduction, to get more Sanctify casts out, which then feed into more cooldown reduction towards that Salvation cooldown to bring it closer to about 5.5 minutes or so. In the incoming raid, I'm going to look to use my Halo first as a cooldown, try to get Salvation out early in the first minute or 2 of an encounter so that I can hopefully have a second cast before the encounter is going to end. Divine Hymn on that 3-minute cooldown, you definitely want to make sure you're getting at least 2 casts on all of the raid encounters, and for some of the longer fights, you might get a 3rd one. When it comes to our utility, using Symbol of Hope early and often in the encounters is absolutely vital, especially after the first large hit on encounters. It reduces the cooldown of all your allies' defenses by 30 seconds, or I guess the most major of the defenses for your allies by 30 seconds. We have a chart in the description down below on my Wowhead guides if you're interested. And this is incredibly important to take advantage of early in encounters so people can use their defensives more frequently, especially for encounters that are going to have 30, 45 second cooldowns on big damage events. It can make a very big impact in having those defensives back much more rapidly. And if your group's pretty uncoordinated, well, make sure that you're using your Desperate Prayer before you channel your symbols. That way you're going to at least have your own personal defensive back for the next big burst of damage. When it comes to Power Infusion, usually the DPS are putting together their own sims and their own setup. Often I'll look to ask my raid leader for who to be able to place it on. I know there's a lot of talk right now about hunters receiving it, but I'll let you guys know as I have more information, as I see which DPS is scrambling the most for the buff. But always, I'm prioritizing the optimal buff up time for them rather than for myself. And if you check my weak auras in the description down below, I also have a weak aura for the Power Infusion request. When it comes to Holy Priest in the meta in Season 1, I think Holy Priest is going to do enormously well in the Nerobar Palace raid. It brings both strong output, really strong output, flexible play styles that are going to make sure that you're never feeling out of place or uncomfortable in any of the situations that we have going forward. While there's a lot of movement on a couple of different fights out there, I think Holy in particular can do very well with pooling Holy Words, pooling Surge Charges to do enough healing on the move when they need to make sure their raid is going to be in a healthy position. So I think Holy Priest is by far one of the best heroic raid healers out there, especially with high raid sizes, but I think it's also going to be an incredibly good pick when it comes to mythic raids, so don't sleep on it. And if you don't see them in the Race to World First too much, don't let that bother you too much, because I think Holy Priest is fantastic and, when operated well, can do absurd amounts of healing. Thanks so much for checking out our guide to Holy Priest in Nerobar Palace, and thank you to our patrons who make all of this content possible. If you're interested in joining and supporting the content further, check us out in the description down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.